So good afternoon to everybody. So I know this is a difficult session after lunch, but still I'll try to not to make you sleepy. So this is what I will be actually talking to you about, conversing with you, impact of British education on India. So the natural question would be, why this topic in translation? So how is it related to translation? So let us see whether this particular topic is related to translation and culture. At the end of the session, we will see whether it is related or not. But first, I would want you to concentrate what happened when there were the colonial masters had different kinds of education policies. I think you must be aware of some of them. For example, you must be knowing, all of you will be knowing about Macaulay. So there is a huge criticism that all of us are Macaulay's children. We don't have our own identity, etc., etc. We have this criticism. So, but before Macaulay, there have been certain developments when British were ruling India, East India Company, and after the conquest of the Queen's proclamation also, we have lot of things which have happened in the education policies. Then we will be seeing what are our, after independence, post-independence education policies, how have they impacted, or what are the problems, or what are the plus points, minus points of the post-independent educational policies in India. And then at the last point, let us see whether these things are related to the problem of translation which we were discussing in the morning. So in the morning, in the first session, what was our focus on? The focus was on language, experience, and knowledge. So whether the education system at the point of British who were there, and after British left us politically, have they have any kind of impact over the way we think about, for example, about culture, the way we think about experience, and what kind of knowledge we have acquired because of this kind of a framework which has been given to us from past 2 to 3 centuries. So this is the focal point. So let's go to the presentation. So the first part is the early part of 18th century. As I told you, before Macaulay, there have been attempts to actually educate Indians in a different manner than what they used to get educated in pre-colonial, in the colonial period. So what were the British doing, the East India Company especially? So there was something they identified as public arena. So to make their governance smooth inside India, so they had to get to know how people are living here, what kind of governance they have, what kind of rules and regulations in their language actually govern these people. So they identified this public arena and they called it Indian ecumen. And they found that this Indian ecumen, or this public arena which is there, which is very rich, and which is very diverse. So there were different kinds of bodies which were educating. For example, there were different kinds of bodies which were giving justice, quote unquote justice. There were different kinds of bodies which used to resolve problems in a particular place. It was very diverse. It was not one in nature. Okay, this was what they found out, and actually the diversity confused them. They didn't know how to deal with this diversity. So they started digging deeper into what Indians were doing in different walks of life. So what was the goal? Methods of gathering strategic information long employed by Indian rulers. So they were already Indian rulers. So there were people who were employed by the Indian rulers. So they started talking to these people, conversing with these people in order to get information. What was the kind of governance? How did they, were there any taxes? Or there is any other financial system? Is there any kind of public administration? All these things they started to gather information from the rulers who were there. It was a very difficult task for them, but still they did it. Okay, next. So this particular gathering of information, because there was lack of written records of anything. It was basically orally they started. The extraction of the information was largely oral, not largely oral, almost oral. So they called this is folk culture, this is popular culture, all these terms began to come up. So then they also saw when they were governing people, they wanted to govern people, they wanted to have rules and regulations, a pattern, a single way of ruling and a single way of having some kind of regulations. They saw that there was this bureaucracy which they knew of from their own culture was completely absent here. So who was doing all these jobs for the public? Who were the people who were responsible to attend, resolve problems of the people? Was the next question for them. So they found in early part of the 18th century, they found that the crucial intermediaries between the rulers, so-called rulers or people who were actually governing, and the people in between, they were the munshis. And these munshis were both Muslims and Hindus. They had equal numbers of Muslims and Hindus. And these were the people who actually, they came to know that these were the people who kept up this bureaucracy. They called it bureaucracy. They were the people who kept up this bureaucracy intact. That is, the whatever had to be done for the public, for the larger public interest, and whatever problems they had, they wanted to resolve, they were done through, even all this financial, all public administration, everything was done through the munshis. They used to handle these things. They were actually they were in intimate contact with the public. That is the public arena. So they knew what were the problems faced by these people. So they used to inform. That's why they were called intermediaries. So there was two-way communication which was done by the munshis. So if we go ahead, then we see that the chronicles and also the scholars from Europe, they suggest that there was collaboration between Indians and company. So the company saw a lot of things could be done by these munshis, okay, these Indians who were there. So they started collaborating with these munshis in order to take care of the people, take care of the public interest, etc. So there started this collaboration between Indians and the East India Company. And these were responsible for an early education policy to educate Indians. Now, they wanted to have a kind of a system which matched their kind of experience, how they governed their own people, their experience totally. So they wanted to educate Indians on that, that model, that pattern. So they found these munshis, and also, mind you, the pandits, Sanskrit pandits, also were partly responsible for actually trying to have an education policy for the Indians who are there to help their governance, basically. It was not like mass education or anything. It was the first step they took was they wanted to take control of the governance here. So they wanted some collaborators, and they found these collaborators in these munshis, largely munshis. And the part of the collaboration was done with the Sanskrit people, Sanskrit pandits. They wanted to know, for example, there is any scripture or there is any kind of a book which could actually tell them about the way they have to levy taxes, for example, or there was some law, some governance, some laws which are there to govern these people. So they started digging up. That's how a lot of, today, what is Manu Dharma Shastra? Popularly known, Manusmriti, what is that known for? I mean, how do you understand in the public, in the popular terms, law book? So that's how law book, Manusmriti became a law book. Okay, whether it is that or not is a question, but popularly today it is known as a law book for Indians. So this particular effort by the British, what happened was it started a bureaucratic process. They started actually co-opting these munshis into some kind of, now whom we call clerks. They started becoming, from munshis, they started transforming into clerks. They started making them understand certain things which came from their own experience, British experience. So this collaboration was often called a dialogic process by which imperial policies and attitudes constructed jointly by the rulers and the ruled. So they called this, this could be this particular policies, and also mind your attitudes. There were certain attitudes which were actually built in to make the munshis into clerks. So this was jointly by the rulers and the ruled. So there was collaboration. They thought there is consent by the ruled, and they started this collaboration. And then what was the general opinion? There were some upper castes like the Brahmins, the Vaishyas, all these people, and the Munshis assisted in building an early pedestal for the kind of education the British wanted to establish. So this was the actual platform they made for smooth governance inside India in the early part of 18th century. These were the beginnings. This was the harbinger of having colonial educational policies in India. So the first important record, there were some, here and there, sparse efforts. But the first one which actually gets recorded is Warren Hastings' efforts as the first Governor General who established Orientalism as official policy. I hope you know what is this Oriental approach. So they had this, anybody who can tell me what is this Orientalism? Oriental approach? ईस्ट की तरफ Orientalism ka. So they thought that the Westerners thought that this Oriental policy would help them, because they saw Orient in a particular manner, and it was their opinion that if the way they saw the Orient, if we put it in a framework, then it will be useful for them. It was not the reality of the Orient, but it was the way they looked at the Orient, that is the Easterners, the non-West. So they thought that the way we think about Orient could bring about a change in the way the education policy or whatever policy could be. Then they will have some smooth kind of a governance there. So you have to remember that this Orientalism is the way the West or the British looked at India or the non-West. It is not the reality of the Easterners or the Indians. It is that way which brought in lot of colonial policies in India. So what was the Orientalism Warren Hastings did was, he encouraged Persian, he encouraged Arabic, and he also encouraged Sanskrit schools. So these three things were native. They considered native to India. So something which is actually akin to the soil of India. So they started encouraging this. And there was this policy of engraftment. The natives might gradually be led to adopt the modern improvements in the sciences. So this Orientalism policy was basically a policy of conciliation. That is, you reconcile with whatever so-called knowledge is there with the natives, and then bring in the most important advancements which has happened in their society. The advancements in their society, they themselves called advanced society. So we will actually engraft certain things from there, and then we will club in certain things which are there here already in India, and that is the engraftment, and there will be conciliation between the natives which are there here, the knowledge of natives here, and the knowledge of the West. So these two policies were actually adopted by some of the rulers like Warren Hastings. They were supposed to be very kinder to the native subjects here. They were supposed to be that. Written policy Yes, yes, they have published. There are a lot of documents available even today. From that, a lot of things have been derived. It is there. That's why I told you these are some of the things which I have taken is recorded already. There were other efforts also, but these are the recorded things. There are public documents. So there was another officer called Jonathan Duncan. So he actually argued that there should be argued for public institution for Sanskrit learning in Banaras. So they saw this Sanskrit learning huge in and around Banaras. There were a lot of pandits who were doing some schools like things. There were gurus, there were pandits who were teaching Sanskrit, Vyakarana, Vedanta, etc. And they saw that there was no institution as such. Like what we know, what the kind of institution we know is university. That kind of a university is not there. That kind of an institution is not present. There were very small set of people who were learning around guru or learning around some pandits. Okay, so this Duncan, then when he saw this sporadically spread this kind of small schools or pathshalas, whatever you may call. So he wanted to have one public institution for Sanskrit learning in Benares. This was the actually first sapling which came up for institutionalization of Sanskrit learning, we can say. And again, I told about this policy of conciliation and policy of encouragement. And then after this, in the last part of the 18th century, this Fort William College was established. Basically, this Fort William College was established to train the people who came here, the officers who came here to govern India. Then later, these, I know some of the munshis and some of the people whom they came into contact, who were potential people who could help them in their governance, they were also taken into the Fort Williams College. So, but basically this was for European administrators in India. So this was probably the first recorded college in India which came up. There was nothing like college in India. So, but there was one, another stream of thinking which was there other than Warren Hastings. As I told you, Warren Hastings was little bit kinder. He wanted this Orientalist policy. He wanted this conciliation policy. He wanted this engraftment policy. But here was Charles Grant, who was another important officer. So he came up with this parallel argument that he was very, very critical of Hinduism as a religion. And he said that this Hinduism as a religion put brakes on material and social progress in India. They were some otherworldly people. They don't know about this, material and social growth at all, social progress at all. They don't know what is development. They don't know what is progress. So what we have to do, so he said these ideas were instrument. So he said that these actually, because absence of these kind of ideas, actually, in India, what happened was there was oppression of certain sections of the people because of this kind of a thinking of Hinduism. There's this standard story, this hierarchical system of India, Indian caste system, all these things. He brought in all these things and he said this is the obstacle for growth. So, next. So this Charles Grant and other people were critical of Oriental way of educating. So they were against Warren Hastings' way of doing things. They wanted something else. The policy of conciliation completely ignored the happiness and moral improvement of the Indian subjects. So he took up these two things. The Warren Hastings' way of dealing with the natives here, actually, it was devoid of happiness. They did not give any kind of happiness to the Indian subjects. They were basically, very unhappy people. And because of, if you do that kind of Orientalist way of teaching here, then there will be no moral upgradation. So basically, there was a feeling that these people were not moral. The natives were not moral. If you cannot do that, then what is the use of your policy of conciliation and engraftment? That was the moral, yes. that you have to decide. We'll come to that point. I will take up that point. So if I tell that, then I'll have to go to the end of the presentation. I'll take it up. So then go back one. So there's the policy of conciliation completely ignored the happiness and moral improvement of the Indian subjects. So what to do? The most important recommendation Charles Grant and other people gave was recommendation of introduction of Christianity and Western education. So there was some kind of an secularized Western education combined with Christianity, which is religious education, because they saw Hinduism as one of the major ills of the society. Next. So then after this recommendation, after Charles Grant, there were 2-3 officers who came. They also recommended, they were in line with Charles Grant. And this Warren Hastings, it has its own problem, but we can say that they were little bit, very considerate towards Indian knowledge systems, all these things. But what took prominence was the line of thinking of Charles Grant. So what happened? Charter Act of 1813 came up. So there was permission for Christian missionaries to promote the promotion of happiness, religious interest, and moral improvement. So you are asking about moral improvement. So see, they have this recommendation in 1813. This was almost the first policy which came up uh, in the field of education. Then you have to have English education. Without English education, there will be no social progress. There will be no economic progress. There will be no progress in any form. That was this. And in next, English Education Act 1835, English as the medium of instruction and administration. So moral improvement of the natives. Because the medium of instruction will be English, and many things which are there in English already, which are taught in some of the schools in Europe, in Britain, all these things, it will come here in the form of English education, and which will be responsible for moral improvement of the natives. Okay. Then this watershed moment of Macaulay. So now all of us speak about that we are Macaulay Putras, we are Macaulay's children, we have not come out of that. We have to have our own way of doing things and all. It came up. So Macaulay's minutes was the water. So what was Macaulay's problem? That the famous statement, all these shelves of so many books is not equivalent to one book of Europe, etc. He said, and then he was in his minutes. Most important point was imbibing truthful character to the Indians. So again on moral behavior, attitude, moral behavior became very important for them. So what do you think is the background for this moral character, imbibing moral character or truthful character? How did they see Indians? How did they say natives? That is a question you have to answer later. So then came Wood's dispatch. So enhancing the moral character of the natives, public instruction departments in every province. Even now we have public instruction department in all of our states. So in every province, universities in the model of London University in all presidencies. Then this Calcutta presidency, Madras presidency, Bombay presidency came up. And then there was Hunter Commission in 1882, establishment of robust primary and secondary education, and granting aid to the education, the educational institutions. So this government started, probably for many years there was no intervention of rulers in colonial India and pre-colonial India. Then suddenly this interference of state in the way of giving grant in aid started. Okay, they started giving grant to many of the educational institutions. Then came Sadler Commission in 1917. Then it gave one important recommendation. You should not ignore the use of mother tongue, but there should be, uh, teaching of philosophy, there should be teaching of all kinds of sciences, which will be in English. But you should have one element of mother tongue. The native languages should not be ignored. And then came Hartog Commission. almost same recommendation which Sadler made. Okay, it was Hartog Commission was more rigid than all other commissions. So all this moral character, English education, everything came in Hartog's. Then this Sergeant Plan and Post-War Educational Development in India in India report by CAB. CAB exists even now, which you might be knowing. So these three commissions did not differ too much from each other. They had almost the same kind of recommendations which were there in the earlier commissions. One or two elements here and there they added. Now, till now, all these policies, colonial reports which came up, is the way British actually tried to improve education system or implement a kind of education system in India, which they thought that it was absent. Now let's come to the next part of the story where we have post-independence story we have. So what kind of education commissions we had? So there is Radhakrishnan's report, formation of UGC, religious. So Radhakrishnan's report said that in Radhakrishnan's report, UGC was the major, formation. And then what did it say? It said religious and moral instruction. Okay, and then developing a secular attitude and basic understanding of principles of all religions. It said university should aim at developing leadership in democracy, rural universities and affiliated colleges, colleges for women, harmonize Oriental and Occidental culture. See, there are two important points which are, apart from formation of UGC, there are two important points which you should observe. Religious and moral instruction, developing a secular attitude and basic understanding of principles of all religions. Okay, then the last point, harmonize Oriental and Occidental culture. So if you see this, go back to the colonial reports. So there should be Warren Hastings, there should be policy of conciliation, there should be policy of engraftment. Almost the same. Yeah, it is there. It was already there. Next. So then in Kothari Commission report, standardization of educational system, 10+2+3 pattern across the country. This actually in the post, no, I think Sadler Commission, it was already recommended, this kind of a pattern. So this commission laid stress on women education, advised setting up of state and central level committees for overseeing women education, moral and religious education be made part of the curriculum. So here again moral comes up here, okay. And then equalization of opportunity to all, irrespective of caste, religion and gender, and to achieve social and national integration, the schools were advised to provide education to backward classes on a priority basis. And then state and national boards examination to be set up and state level evaluation machinery be put in place. All those things, legalize the educational standards. So the 1, 2, 3, fourth point, important, please keep that in mind. Next. So then Yashpal committee report, important recommendations are unified authority for higher education, establishment of National Educational Tribunal and National Research Foundation. So university should cater to the needs of the society, trustee of humanist tradition, it should be there. So there is something which is very important here also. Then we have NEP 2020. So what are the major goals of NEP 20? Universalization of education, gender inclusion fund, special educational zones, single overarching body to regulate higher education, then the structure of education. Okay. Next. So now, you saw, now there was this presentation, most of you must be knowing about this colonial policies and also all these reports which, there are other reports which I have left off because more or less they are saying the same thing. So there were colonial policies and you saw post-independent educational policies. So when you see both of them to put together in one, in one chunk, do you think there is a continuation or there is a discontinuation of the colonial policy in the post-independent era? Continuation. Yes? In what sense do you think? Okay. The structure, it was a standard. There's a kind of a conditioning which has happened. So you think it's continuation. Any other answers from your side? Anything else you see here? Yes, of course it's continuation, I agree. Anything else you see majorly here? So NEP 2020, we have a lot of hopes. We are pinning a lot of hopes on that. But it is not devoid of the continuation. This is my argument. So there is a kind of, so that's why I told you I'll answer your question later. There is a kind of continuation. What is that continuation basically? The continuation is the problem of this moral character. And there is an assumption that that is not there present. That has continued in post-independent era. So this is one thing which we have to observe, that maybe we are immoral creatures. That consideration is there because each and every policy is actually endorsing this kind of a, there is an attitude in Indians which is there. Probably that is what you said, is that is by default we have accepted it and we have not said a word about it. So this is the most important thing. This is the thread of thinking which has been. So even in post-independent era, after 75 years of independence, Amrit Mahotsav, all everything we are celebrating now, we have not come out of. We are championing. Many people we have said that we are different from what we used to be. We are new. All these things are there. Our arguments are there, but basically the framework, thinking about ourselves, thinking about our own experience, thinking about how we exist, has not changed. The basic framework, the background has not changed until and unless we change in that thinking, in that framework, then it will not be possible for us to change anything. Yes. I think we'll have to have a different session for that, to have a glimpse of what kind of education system existed in pre-colonial India. One thing, and the second thing is we don't have full access to what kind of education system existed in pre-colonial India. We talk about Gurukula, etc., but we don't know. That's, that is the.
Let me respond very quickly. No, 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 no. Wait, Sangeet. I will. No, no. Wait. No, you're referring to historical facts, right? Because your claims are. No. No. This is not the offense. See, you're referring to historical facts. Now we need to examine the nature of historical facts, right? Now this claim that education was not accessible or denied to certain groups is a complex question in one or two different sense. Now, let me first start with the data that is available, right? So you have plenty of data that is available from 18th century, which British came. They had a task to understand, for example, what is the status of education in Indian society, right? So there was Munro's report, there was Adams' report, and then you have Leitner's report, And there are a whole range of documents which are available when they initiated the discourse on public instruction. They wanted to figure out what is the status of education in India, what kind of communities participated in it. So if you look at it, for example, one of the sensational controversy that happened in the British Parliament in the early 19th century, very early in the 19th century, when in terms of comparability of the number of schools and number of higher learning institutions, Munro makes this report to the British Parliament, Commonwealth Parliament, where he says that there are 1 lakh schools in the Bengal presidency. The reason why the 1 lakh school, he travels throughout the Bihar, Odisha, Jharkhand, and the Bengal part. And he goes that he couldn't find a single village which was without school. Okay. And there were schools where certainly more than one school. To give you an example, in his report, the district like Bardwan, for example, now itself had 100 plus higher learning institutions, according to their report. Those many number of institutions were not present in the UK at that time. The number that were there in just one small district of Bengal was not even matchable with what was there in Bengal. Now the challenge comes in fact, you have very illustrious details of how many jatis were there, who were the teachers, for example. You'll be surprised to know there were less Brahmin teachers. Okay, there were people from what jatis, were teachers. If you actually have a look at it, all this data is available. One can go and just examine. You would be surprised that our narrative today about which communities didn't have education, which communities had education, does not seem to be dependent on historical facts. Because historical data, which was collected by the British, because these were official documents. In fact, one of the statement of Gandhi, which led to the investigation. So Gandhi makes this claim when he goes to Chatham's house in the 1930s Round Table Conference. He goes and makes this claim that, look, because you came, you destroyed a beautiful tree of education which India had. And then the Hartak committee report, he was then the Vice Chancellor of the Sri Aurobindo University. So he writes a letter to Gandhi that if you are making a claim, it's a historical claim, show me the evidence. And that time Gandhi was in full peak of his independence movement. He writes, I know what I said is true, but I don't have data to prove you, and I'm busy. For many years, Hartak chases him. For about almost a decade, Hartak keeps on writing letter to him. Gandhi couldn't respond to him. Now, post-independence, Dharampal goes back and puts his hand over to these dusted documents which are available, wherein he digs out deeper. And what Dharampal's book, Beautiful Tree, for instance, has is actually less than what the Europeans had. Now we have much more greater data available from 17th century onwards in terms of the kind of schooling, kind of education infrastructure which was available. This is first important point. So in that sense, to claim, saying the first level, that education was denied to certain communities is not a legitimate claim to make. The first thing. At least if it is a historical claim that you wanted to make, history cannot support such claim. The first important point to be noticed. Now there is another different question which is pertaining to continuity of what we spoke in the morning. Now many of these people, when they were actually writing this report, in the archive if you go through, they actually make certain important observations. For example, Munro and Adams, both, they point to this part. They're asked to go and collect the data, village-wise. So somebody goes to Bellary, somebody goes to Burdwan, somebody goes to Lahore. All these places, they're pooling data. It was not easy to collect data. When they were collecting data, they somehow had to categorize. Now look, in Europe, there was a particular conception of education system. Now there is a history to what could allegedly be called education system. Now if you go back to the history, I will take a little digression and bring it to your attention. When we talk about education system, what do we mean? See, in Europe, for example, till 10th century, there was monastic schools, which were organized around church. And there was a point in time, the papal revolution happens and institution around Pope gets structured by around 10th, 11th century. Once that happens, now there was this question, because the Vatican gets into this business of saying which is the legitimate state and which is not, which is the legitimate monarchy, which is not, when they had to get into this business of deciding whether somebody becomes a king, whether he is in accordance with the doctrine of the Christianity. Now, in that process, first they started certifying which is the legitimate state or not. And after that state got established, monarchies got established, they have to get involved in this process of deciding whether they are in accordance with the doctrines of Christianity or not. Now, in that process, what they have to do is, now you have to go and verify whatever is being taught in various schools, whether it is in accordance with this doctrine or not. They have to create institutions to measure whether whatever is being taught is in accordance with the Christian doctrines or not. As a consequence, they have to create the structures of evaluation and the pattern. There has to be a centralized system because it has to be in line with Christian doctrine. And this continues and evolves into various institutional structure of education system. This is what today also we comprehend as the structure of education system in India. Because if you write a syllabus, for example, is its syllabus in accordance with curriculum framework? Whether this curriculum framework is in alignment with national curriculum framework. So therefore you have to have a monitoring and even evaluation system, etc. This was one structure. When they came to India, one of the most important things that was extremely evident was there was no such institutional organization, right? Now, but there was a flourishing educated population. The standards of education across the community was far more higher, diversity, because you get to the finer details, even what textbooks were used, what method, how did they teach it. These finer details are available in the historical archives today. And if you say their difficulty was, there exists a system where they teach. There is teaching learning environment. Okay, it is done very systematically, but you don't have something which could be called as a system. If you remember Ashwini's earlier, she consciously presented, they came and tried looking at bureaucracy. Who is responsible in measuring and monitoring for what? Now, you don't have such a system. You didn't have that. Now, as a consequence, they had great difficulty. That's why these reports actually point to this fact very clearly. These people learn this extraordinary. You know, there is a very systematic way of teaching, but there is no bureaucracy. Therefore, whether we should we call it school, whether should we call it higher learning, etc., etc. In fact, they find it very chaotic because the Rajas of the time could not actually instruct what should be decided as the content. There was an absolute freedom, and the scholars used to decide. In fact, one of the very central part of this educational infrastructure was it is the scholars who used to decide what has to be taught. It is the community which used to decide, and the state could not interfere. What state at the maximum could do, state in the sense the Raja could do, is to give grant, is to give tax concessions, but they could not really regulate. Therefore, there was a flourishing education system, and they found that till that continues to survive, they had already a parallel opinion that Indian people were not moral people in according to their standard. Now, one of the most central aspect that came is that you need to institutionalize education in the way it exists. It's a pale variant of what European education system was. You need to bring that and bring the moral character. So the moral character, truthful character becomes the central part. Do you think that our people were not moral? Do you think that our people were not truthful? Now, they felt that these people were immoral. They felt that these people were not truthful. And this happens. This is a problem which is as fundamental as I was saying, where do you take a particular word and place in which concept clusters? They had that difficulty. They knew people learned, people were educated. Transactional today in NEP, for example, you have functional literacy and numeracy. There is a specific chapter on it. And one of the striking thing, what they could not give to their British masses is this functional literacy and numeracy is something is so phenomenally widespread throughout India. In terms of number of higher education learning centers, they called it, higher learning centers were terrific. In fact, they couldn't comprehend the numbers, and they were not run by any Raja. Raja had the only thing that Raja could have given is that he could have given some grant or some village revenue as part of that. No, we'll come back to some of your point. They're unclear which direction they're moving to. No, no, wait. There is the question of untruthful is an issue. No, there is, because uh, after 1835 British India education policy, by 1860s, they wanted to come back to India and they wanted to evaluate what is the impact of the British education in India. Now, there were a series of surveys that were conducted, and the people who were part of these education systems were examined, right? Now, one of the striking thing that they found many things in those reports, which is something that people can read and access. But one of the striking things that they noticed in that, that is what they wanted to achieve, is that Indian people who go through this British education system are developing something called conscience. Okay. Now, see, today as Indians today, we think that conscience is something, Atma Sakshi, etc. We speak in a different way. They were not referring to that. A conscience means conscience. It means that there is an apparatus which actually tells you how to make a particular kind of normative moral judgment. What is obligatory, what is non-obligatory, what you should do, what you should do, certain particular kind of judgment
No, in
that you have to
fact,
do.
in Queen's proclamation, they said we will not convert anymore. That was their policy. Okay, and then 1856, I think, 1863. Then they said we will not convert, we will not make them into Christians. But what we will do, we will provide them with mass education, English education, majorly in English education, here and there native language education, so that we keep up the conscience of people.
Conscience is an apparatus which is, see, to give you, let me put a clarification on how. See, we Indians have great difficulty in making sense of it. In English, there are two important terms which are associated with anything which is moral. Now, we use two different terms. One is ethics, another one is morality. These two constitute something called normative ethics. Now, this way of functioning to exist, you have to use a particular language. This language involves usage of something called moral ought, O-U-G-H-T, moral oughts. Now, last 2000 years in India, in any Indian languages, even for instance, Chinese languages, you can't use this. For example, whenever Indians, including myself, we read ought, you ought to do this. How do we read it? You should do this. You must do this. But ought has a different linguistic force. Now, we don't have that. We have a completely different conception of dealing with the world. So therefore, when they say that they have to be morally upright people, they are not really measuring you from your standards. See, from our childhood, we learn how to respect elders, how to deal with the other neighboring people, how to treat the host, etc., etc. You learn that. They have serious problems with that. Okay, they lead to serious consequence because this is part of something called normative ethics. That's precisely why I introduced in the morning that reference of what they are saying, where to place it in Indian culture was a problem. They were trying to see what Indians were doing. They didn't say that these people are bad. But in terms of what is the measure of an ethical being, is something is not being met with. They were expecting that everywhere in the world you can talk about morality using the language of art, as if it is known to all cultures. Now, in Indian languages, our experience, it is almost not possible, even today. Now, we might write in English, you ought to do this. In law and other propositions, ought becomes a very important language. But how do you say it in any Indian languages? How do you act using that? Because morality is a component of action. You have to derive action out of these claims. You can't do that. It's a whole different world. Now, for them, it is not about your, see, for example, when James Mills came and looked at India, for him, whole Asia is corrupt. Whole Asia is corrupt. Anybody who is from history would know Asians are corrupt. Now, what does he mean by that? He is not saying these people are stealing, these people are brave. That's not his point. The corruption is of a particular kind because they don't have the apparatus that is required for them to be a normal moral human being, which requires functioning in accordance with the language of art, which is simply not possible. I mean, of course, in that standard, I am not a moral person. Because even today, though I intellectually understand what ought refers to, I really don't know how to use it. But for me, should and must are the only thing that is comprehensible. Other things, no, ought does not.
That's why in the post-independence policies, educational policies, there was this stress on this moral, building moral character. Okay, we don't know what is that moral actually. We don't know what is that conscience.
See, let's ask this question. From 1813, the Charter Act, till now, more than 2 centuries we have traveled. And if you say that education policies are successful, for example, now 2020 NEP, we should not be emphasizing on building moral character of a human being. I mean, to give you contrast, for example,
No,
you go and read the education policies in Holland, United Kingdom. You don't have these sentences appearing in these education policies.
Why here?
I mean, policy documents should refer. But the point that we're bringing back, if this is what has to be the structure of education, now the content that is being prepared, that is the last part that she was going to talk. Since the question came, I made this extra interference. The content is also prepared to orient towards that. So it hardly matters whether you learnt in Kannada or Hindi or Malayalam. Now, what you learned, what went into the part, it is completely opposite of, for example, what morning Sampadananda ji described as the way to understand the language.
So
how do you understand our own language?
The whole content of the education policy, or how education has to be given out or disseminated to Indians, is based on this framework. Then whether it is Malayalam, whether it is Kannada or Hindi, it just doesn't matter. So what we are translating, so coming back to the question, what we are translating has this framework with us. We don't have anything. If we write something, or if we teach in Kannada, if we teach in our mother tongue, then it will be different. All these things are there. I think it is a bogus claim what we make. Because how is it different? Claim, bogus, that we'll be decolonized. We don't have English education.
Or just by writing textbooks in Kannada or Malayalam, until and unless if you don't address the problems of how to use language and how to make people learn using language, no matter which language you write, no? See, today by accident that we ended up taking English. Imagine we would have taken French, we would have done the same thing. As long as, see, the fundamental question, one of the concerns that the large number of people who are bothered about education is that our children are not learning to be a human. This is a fundamental question. Across the ideology, this is a commonly agreed point. Different ideologies might fight on certain objectionable issues. Yeah, but the point is that there is a very evidently recognizable point that we are unable to produce the kind of educational output that we are supposed to find. And language plays a very central role, because knowledge acquisition without language is impossibility. And mind you, the structure that the British built in India had an extraordinary emphasis on language. Now, language in the sense what content and how it should be presented in a particular language. In fact, if you look at, with pride we speak, first Kannada dictionary, proper Kannada dictionary, Kitten, Sanskrit dictionary, Monier Williams, H.H. Wilson, any language. I mean, in fact, don't think that this is some overnight event that has happened. Even today, these are standards for us. Now the problem Tilak will introduce tomorrow morning when he takes up his presentation, and afternoon after the session, Harshit will actually emphasize on some of these issues of what happened to our language. And if you don't address them, no matter whether you write it in Kannada, Hindi, English, how does it matter? अगर आपको नहीं सीखना है किस भाषा में है तो क्या फर्क पड़ेगा? So this is where we would end up in, because the structures are very important, because the structures have a goal and your content has to be subordinated to the goals of the institution. Like for example, all of you are teachers. Can you randomly write a syllabus? Obviously not. You're given, you're defined what is the structure within which you can actually develop a syllabus. Now, how do you come to that structure? So there is a structure that already comes as a larger policy framework, and it tells you what for what. So therefore, one of the very important, if you want to radically, it is not simply about Indianization of education, it is about really learning freely, really explore my potential, really, to use the language of Aurobindo, if you have to expand your consciousness, for example, if you want to be really flourishing, blooming person, you need education to make you free. In Kannada, one of our poets uses this word, Nirankushamati. Nirankushamati. So the intellect which is not constrained, Nirankusha. Now, this is, if we want to do that, we have structural and historical constraints which are imposed on us. And this is something to do with the way we look at language. That's what the point that I was trying to push across. That there are references in the language and they are deeply linked to the way you make sense of a particular reference, draw meaning out of it and the background ideas and how they get distorted. Because learning happens in a very peculiar way. Learning, not everything in learning is decided by the meaning problem, the way that linguists would want us to actually believe. To give you an example, see, I don't know how many of you have learned in your mother tongues, your early school education. If you have learned in mother tongues, now to learn physics, I learned in Kannada. In Hindi also it is the same word. To learn theory of gravity, gravitational force when we learn. Now it gets translated in Indian languages as Gurutvakarshana Shakti. Right? In Hindi also it is Gurutvakarshana Shakti. Now it is actually a wrong translation. Because Gurutva, meaning we don't even know whether it is weightness or massness. And any formulation in gravitational theory cannot measure this ness. Either it has to be mass or weight, but if it is weight, it is not part of the gravitational theory, it has to be mass. Now, even though this is a wrong translation, we learn because there is underlying ideas which actually navigate us to understand mass. Even if the word Gurutvakarshana is a wrong translation, you yet capture it because there are background idea which actually puts your reference back to where you have to go, because you have to learn force, you have to learn mass, separately all that when you're dealing, you do that. So here and there small error does not actually kill your translation. You learn because most of the scientists in ISRO have learned in mother tongue and they've been successfully launching rockets very accurately. And at a time we have the credit, 100 satellites at a time to the space. So therefore, our ways of looking at language had to shift from a direction that we are in today, from somewhere else, then only translation becomes efficient. So even if there is some here and there meaning error, in Sanskrit like language help us not to go that error, but then you can even point out, you can actually, if you focus on the background ideas, you can compensate for it. I give you a classical example. For more than 60 years, Indians have been learning Gurutvakarshana Shakti. We have not committed error in measuring gravity. Our calculations have never, led to gravity 9. We have been fairly accurate. Therefore, there is a different way to look at language which only can make sense and help us get out of this problem.
So when it becomes, in Gurutvakarshana, it doesn't matter. But where it matters, for example, Hinduism is not a religion. That is what is the popular opinion. So what is Hinduism? So it is Hindu dharma, it is not Hindu religion. So how do you use Hinduism? Even if you call it Hindu dharma in Indian languages, the structure of religion is not lost. We still treat Hinduism as a religion. There it matters. There the translation matters. And it is not the language which matters. As he said, it is the conceptual framework which matters. So you call it Hindu Dharma, but the structure is the same as Hinduism. You treat the people who are living in Bharata or in this country might be Hindus, but it is not, there is nothing called Hinduism. It's a group of traditions. We are living here. But we say Hindu Dharma, but Dharma is equivalent to religion. That's how we are doing it. The structures are not lost.
No. So let's not get into this appropriation theory. They wanted to understand it. Or there might be people who might be interested in appropriating, there might be people who might be celebrating, all kinds of people, because this is the job done by thousands of people. Okay, so that is not the point. They wanted to understand the way that we had problem, they also have the problem, no? Because it's a human problem. In their experiential world, they had religion and they searched for religion here. See, if you get to know the story of religion, for example, as late as 1600s, in Portuguese, for example, there was this brilliant thinker called Rogario, who comes and tries to find out religion in 1600s. What is the nature of Hindu religion? And he comes and looks at it, and he comes to the conclusion that you cannot prove the existence of religion among these masses. So, but he is convinced that there exists a religion. So he had to infer through some means. So he had to do whole circus to draw. I mean, he didn't see religion. Today, in 20th century, all of us see religion, Hindu religion. We have no ambiguity. But a Christian theologian who came, who knew what religion was, he was a theologian, top scholar, he couldn't see religion 400 years back. And we have today people without religion, and we have absolutely no problem seeing religion. So this kind of distortion, one of the very important things that we must understand, this get transmitted, structured way through our education. And the liberation from this is, we have to work within this, and we have to start reworking on the content and what should get into. How do we think about our language? How do we think about our phenomena? Because this is not the question of some ideology or the other. This is the question of, do you see? Can you make sense of what happens in front of you? There are things that happen. Delhi mein kuch ho raha hai, hamare gaon mein kuch ho raha hai. Do we make sense of it? Now, one of the way in this direction, if you carry the particular way of using language, understanding theories, particular way of talking about the phenomena in the world, you are led to continue this. Even after 1 century, we would be saying, there is something which is wrong happening, we have to do. There is a crisis of higher education in India. Report over reports keep writing. Even after 200 years, that's the story which continues. Now, should we have that, or should we think about alternative? While thinking about it, it's important to know what has happened historically if you want to really make any difference to it. Let me quickly respond to you. I am familiar with the work that you're referring to. And I am also familiar with much more from where he draws. Because it's not his own original idea, he draws from other sources. Now, you see this itself, for example, the distinction between Brahmanical versus non-Brahmanical itself is a phenomena which is a very late 300-400 years back, right? I mean, earlier nobody understood that language. I mean, even today, for example, Shramana, that you say Bauddha and Jaina, it was not seen that way. Okay, Shramanas are certain kind of sannyasis in the Vedic period. Okay, but today all these are the categories that were talked about later. And there is an entire story of how the religious culture saw non-religious cultures in the world. How Islam comprehended it. One of my colleagues actually works Islam, how looked at India, and how Greeks saw it. They're very, very different, uncomparable. Megasthenes to Al-Biruni, there is no match. So there is a significant difference. So a lot of story of Chattopadhyaya, for instance, with due respect to his scholarship, is something that is completely devoid of anything significant. It's hermeneutical, rather, right? It is not really looked into what exactly the pictures that you could draw from the available sources. I mean, I can very sympathetically say, but this problem of otherness, see, this is a very fake problem social scientists carry. Now, in the sense that there are different hierarchies within which you can talk about the self and the other, right? You are an other to me, right? So in that way, there are different levels in which othering happens in the world, right? There are sociological othering, psychological othering, okay, there is biological othering, all kinds of othering that we can talk about. I don't know why make big fuss out of it. The only place where I see proper theorization of this othering is a problem is by Edward Said. What Edward Said says is that in Christian culture, when they looked at the other, they do something extraordinarily, unthinkable, that the other is always an inferior linearized version of you. In a way, the other is your infancy. Is what? In fact, they actually efface the otherness. They cut. The otherness of the other dies down. In fact, the more you other, I think it is very good because you differentiate people. And it is very important to look at the differences in people. See, look why important. See, I invite somebody to my house. Okay, I would really want to know their jati and the region. Now, when they come to see, for me in my house, whomever comes as an Atithi Devo Bhava, I have to take care of them very seriously. And if I want to know who likes garlic, who does not like garlics, in southern part of Karnataka, most of the South India, there are jatis who do not consume garlic, there are jatis who consume garlic. Who can you eat raw onion, who cannot? And we get to know about jatis because we really wanted to know that other, what is comfortable, what is palatable to him, what is not palatable to him. This recognition of difference is so significant to coexist. Otherwise, we run into problem. You become very imposing. If you don't respect differences between people, you actually become a troublemaker in the world. In order to live peacefully in the world, you need to, in fact, you should also know that if you want to be happy, you should know your own otherness because you are your children other, you are the child's other. 10 years back, 5 years back, what did you do? This reflection also requires you to other your own self. So, I don't know why political scientists and sociologists, historians are quite crazy about this otherness. In fact, it is. Yeah. I don't even understand why discrimination has to be negative all the time. It should have a moral connotation. Because you do, see in our tradition, for example, there is something called Taratamya Viveka. So, Taratamya is a very important Viveka. Because what is good, what is not good. Bheda, Veda. Okay, you need to make distinctions in the world. So, and it suddenly in India, the moment the social sciences enter India, discrimination becomes a moral overtone. You can't exist in the world if you don't discriminate, right? So you do discrimination every day, teacher and the student. Office, there are hierarchies in which you discriminate. And it is very important viveka, because you know how to conduct yourself under different discriminated situations. Where to say what, right? So we have, see, one of the product of what she was pointing out, we have actually killed all these nuances in our learning. And that comes because of language. The heart of it is because of translation. When we read theories of discrimination, theories of equality in Europe, we don't really understand in what conditions, what circumstances they are talking about. Everywhere equality, you will know. People in Delhi have very clear ideas of what is the connotations are. Right? Where to use it, under what conditions it works, under what condition it should not. There has to be a very clear-cut significant differences. And precisely because of the bad language, these nuances are screwed up today. Now, that is something that we have to be attentive. It is not necessary you should buy my story, but it's important that you need to be attentive to, because at the end of the day, that answers this question, how do I live in this world? And how do I live? What kind of a human being that you wanted to be? And if you want to be happy, your surroundings should allow you to be happy. Okay, your surroundings are horrible and wherever you put me, I'm going to be happy, is not going to work. So in that way, you have to keep your surroundings very comfortable, for which you need to really get into careful theorization of the society, which is very helpful. And that's exactly where we are faulty.